Hello. I now demand your attention. That's why I'm standing like this. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gender/Feminism in Debating by me, Helen. Smiley face. That's how you know I'm excited. Is I've added a smiley face. I am going to be training you tonight. Why am I training you tonight and not literally anybody else? Well, you see, the PowerPoint is not working, so I can't show you. Yippee! Here are my credentials. This is every single academic thing I have written about feminism, and one time that I got an 81 and my novice got a 78 in a feminism debate. Any of these that graded well, I can send to you. Thank you, thank you. So the reason that I am doing this presentation is because I know a fuckload about feminism and love to yap about it, which is to your detriment and my gain. Some content warnings. We're talking about feminism. We're going to be talking about gender-based violence, male violence against women. Like in general, there's going to be some times that we're going to be heavy. Obviously, we're not going to go into like massive detail, but please be aware. And if this isn't the thing for you right now, not going to be offended if you leave or anything like that. And yeah, absolutely. And also, as like a warning, this is being recorded. Is there anybody that does not consent to being recorded and posted on YouTube? Posted on YouTube. Just raise your hand and we can either cut out your contribution. We can cut out your contribution basically from like the final thing. Yippee! Fantastic. Okay, so here's the objectives of our training session today. A brief overview of underlying theories that you can use to your advantage in debates. We want to begin to move away from using lived experience to like win at feminism debates, because not everybody has lived experience that they can utilize for feminism debates. And generally, by explaining the underlying theory, when you are given a motion, you can be like, what is the underlying theory that links to this debate? And then utilizing either the underlying theory and its principles or criticisms of it in order to begin your case gen. This isn't a substitute for doing good case gen, because there will be lots of critiques that are and are not relevant, but it's a foundational step for you so that you are less like, when it comes to feminism debates, which, yeah. So, what are the goals of the feminist movement, broadly? First of all, the goal of the feminist movement is that all the genders are equal. There are multiple ways that the movement has gone about it to get to different like levels of equality. You have a formal or legal equality, which is that women and other gender minorities have the same amount of legal recognition and protection as men. You have economic equality, where they are equally compensated for their labor with men. And you have social equality, which is where they are considered to be equal to men, right? These are like the different mechanisms of equality that we can measure by. And in the West, in the UK, we have broadly had formal equality for a couple of decades. We have allegedly had economic equality for like a little bit more around about the same amount of time, and social equality is something that we are like still working towards, but it's very nuanced, it's very complex, depending on what like feminism you ascribe to. You might have disagreements about any of these type of things. Here is an overview of the waves of feminism. You have, again, this is a Western-centric thing of the waves of feminism, as opposed to like looking at the other countries in the world. But you have your first wave of feminism, which was the late 19th, early 20th century. The broad goal was for society to recognize that women were people. And one of the pushes that was coming in there was the right to vote. And one of the successes of first wave feminism was the right to vote. Your second wave was the 60s and 70s. That begins deconstructing what society says women's role should be, challenges gender norms. This is the time that we start getting our Equal Pay Acts in the UK, in the USA, other places, right? That. Third wave and fourth wave, feminists are having conversations about if we are in a fourth wave. Just for like the simplicity of it, I'm going to say that we have 4 waves, with like some weirdness happening here. But the third wave started in the 80s. This was about reclaiming femininity, clothing, autonomy, like sexual autonomy, and beginning to feel empowered as a culture. So you get a lot of your representation and role models from that time. You get a lot of like girl power, punk girl type of thing from that time as well. And your fourth wave is from like the 2010s to around about now. This movement has been grappling with the historical exclusion of women of color and trans women, and has become more popular in response to attacks on women's liberties. Some of your like notable campaigns from this era is the Me Too movement and conversations about abortion after Roe versus Wade was overturned. Does anyone have any questions about these waves or the goals of feminism as I've defined them? Yes.
Out of curiosity, the like potential shift back to more traditional forms of femininity, would that also be something that's classed under the fourth wave, or is that like its own?
I think that by the time you're like looking at playing around with gender roles in the fourth wave, there's like a queer theory aspect to it that is like very like weirdly unique to the fourth wave. But yes, there is like not a clear consensus of which wave we are in. So reclaiming femininity versus reclaiming parts of femininity versus completely disregarding femininity, that's all happening in this wave, in this like part of this like brand of 50, 60 years. I can do maths. Yeah.
How is intersectionality in the third wave different from grappling with historical exclusions of women of colour in the fourth wave?
So they started doing the work on intersectionality here, and now I would say that in the fourth wave, if you are defining them as separate ones, which again, it's centering intersectionality, it's becoming a thing that is more important rather than a thing that is like something that some feminists are talking about. So most feminists who are active would claim to be intersectional feminists in the fourth wave, as opposed to the third wave, where that's less likely to happen. Again, very fuzzy lines between these two. You could very easily argue that there is no fourth wave, that it's all third wave. And if so, then you can take all of these points as 1 point. Cool. Anything else? Yippee. Okay, critiques of gender roles and patriarchy. What feminism is basically doing. I think that broadly, feminist movements are saying there is a system of patriarchy. Patriarchy is the social conditions and conditioning in which we are born into and that we grow up in. And there are several things wrong with this system. Broadly, that it relies on women as a class as well. It's like not necessarily women as an identity. The people who are oppressed are people that society decides are women. So that doesn't necessarily, that's not just cis women, right? There are plenty of people who do not fit into the mold of cis women who are oppressed under patriarchy. And like there's a lot of complicated like intersections of oppression depending on what someone's gender identity is. But women or feminized agents is a way that some scholars refer to like that as a class. Like that they are like oppressed in order for men or masculinized agents to have more rights, to have more things that they can do. So the critiques are of the ways that the different genders are socialized, right? The way that that women and feminized agents are socialized to be, you know, very demure, very mindful, very quiet, to be empathetic, to be cooperative, to be reassuring, to do the household labor, to bear children, to stay in the home, everything like that. And how simultaneously those traits are devalued, and men are socialized to be aggressive, they are socialized to be assertive, they are socialized in many ways to be violent, and how masculine qualities are viewed as good qualities, or even are viewed as morally neutral qualities, right? There's a lot of distinction between like men as the default and anything else, like women and gender minorities as the other. And a lot of patriarchy is taking masculine traits or like traits that we have that have become masculine because of the way that people have been socialized and deeming them to be neutral, and feminized traits are weird things, right? So like a debating example, right? Most equity officers are women and feminized agents. It is notable when a cis man is an equity officer because women are socialized to be good at that work. That is like a thing. I suppose it's less so now, but like that's an example from a debating context, right? Okay, yippee. This is our first exercise. Please look at this album cover and then tell me how you feel about it. Any response is fine. Unironically, I want to hear everyone's opinions. I want to hear your immediate gut reaction. I want to hear, maybe not 10 minutes because I do have a train to catch, but I want to hear what it is you have to say about this album cover. Okay, anybody want to start?
I remember the discourse around this album cover and it being about whether or not it's her enjoying herself or her not. But if you look at her face, the way that she's looking at the camera, she has this open mouth kind of sexualized expression, but she doesn't look like she's actually in it. She's not smiling. She's not even grimacing. She's not having fun. It still looks really posed.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Okay, I will do one. When I first saw this image, I did not like it. I thought it was demeaning and I did not like it. And I have spent some amount of time trying to grapple and do discourse with myself about if this is empowering or if it is not empowering. People have different opinions on whether it is empowering or not. Personally, I did not like it at all. I thought that it was very strange, very weird, did not enjoy.
I feel like it's an intentionally charged image, which is like created so that it inherently causes discourse between people who support it and otherwise it's just ultimately makes the album sell.
Yeah, so it's provocative. Yep. Anybody else? I'm gonna start picking on people. Okay.
Feels posed.
Feels posed.
Generally what people said before.
Mhm.
I think my first reaction was like, I've seen this somewhere before. I don't remember what her name was. The second reaction was like, this seems like it's posed. It doesn't seem empowering because it doesn't seem like a thing that's actually happening. And given that it's just there as an image, it feels more demeaning than it does empowering, if you will, for those.
Some additional context. This is an album cover. The name of the album is Man's Best Friend. For anybody that does not have, like, is not chronically online. With that in mind, does anybody else have thoughts about it? Yeah.
I think in abstract it is quite demeaning, but if you like listen or watch many of her videos, then she's basically like this in every single performance. So like for me, when it first came out, I just thought like, oh, it's another Sabrina Carpenter wow moment.
Zainab?
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think basically all the songs on the album are like quite sexually explicit. And like that is kind of the brand image she's built between her two albums. I think her first album cover stands out because it's like less in the image that she ends up having on like her tour. And so this very much is like fits in line with her brand. I guess if she's made that brand to be empowering, then that's a different thing. Like I hope that like some producer has made her make her brand that. So like if that's what she chose then.
You had a comment as well, sorry?
Yeah, I was saying, contextually speaking, Sabrina Carpenter's brand prior to this album was very much sexualized, but it was done in a way that was catering towards a female audience. I think a lot of my reaction initially when I saw this album cover was the fact that suddenly the female audience doesn't feel as considered because the person in the picture appears to be male. And so the like dynamic that's been introduced is suddenly not solely on Sabrina Carpenter as a single figure, but instead as subordinate to a male figure, which as of like, previously in her music wasn't evident. So I think a lot of her fans were taken aback by the fact that suddenly a dynamic had been introduced that was more with another person that wasn't just surrounded by her kink or her sexuality.
I guess on that specifically, her brand tends to be like, I think there's something about in her music videos. She like almost always kills a man. So her brand was actually quite the opposite. So it's really surprising that originally when she first came out with it. She was always very like, she's always presented herself as the like person in power in a relationship. And this seems
The back.
I think like she should have just missed the mark in some fact. I think that's what she was intending. Like when when I scroll on IG Reels, I feel like just like, yeah, like I'm just pointing this and stuff, like I'm not gonna do anything, or like stupid isn't how they do. I think like the problem is there's a lot of context behind I think we just found like what it's saying. And so when someone who like doesn't listen to music, doesn't even want to listen to music, then comes across this, it sort of gives off like the false impression, I suppose.
But then in the same vein, there may be the idea that she was appealing to an audience who she believed already knew her brand. And here she's not engaging in necessarily a submissive dynamic in this position because she's not addressing the man. She's looking at us. And so there is potentially a statement that's being made that she is assuming the audience is aware that this is not necessarily a submissive position, but an empowering position for her. And as such, the intention may have gotten lost, like in, as we said, like the external factor of it all.
Anybody else have thoughts? Okay. Put your hand up if you think this is a empowered pose, knowing how much you know about Sabrina Carpenter, whatever, the conversation that we've had. Put your hands up if you think that this is a non-empowered pose. There's a lot of people who didn't put hands up, and I'm very upset. Okay.
I mean, I have like another comment.
Yes, yeah.
I think that it might be empowering in the sense that it's supposed to make people uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So it's not empowering in the image itself, but almost by the result of it, by trying to make people a little bit uncomfortable.
Yep.
Don't know if it has to be either, because clearly expressive sexuality is maybe subversive, but at the same time, insofar as this is also supposed to be a corporate product, I don't know if she's thinking about it one way or the other.
Obviously, this is like, I think it would not be problematic to characterize this as a sexually submissive pose. As like a food for thought, just while we're moving on, there has been a degree of women reclaiming overt sexuality in recent decades, where they have been reclaiming it in the form of dominant, the dominator, in any particular like context. And this is somebody, Sabrina Carpenter, who is reclaiming sexuality in the context of being submissive. So the reason that I continue to grapple with this is that I see that she is being submissive, and I associate being sexually submissive with being repressed, when actually some people are sexually submissive and are empowered. So a little bit of like, just like, so put it in the brain, let it defrost a bit, have like a little think about it. I wanted to see what opinions were of this, just to like get us thinking about all the feminisms. Anyone have any last thing before I move on? Yippee. Okay, we're going to now run through some theories of like different feminisms. I'm going to explain to you the ideological underpinnings, some of the successes that they've had, and then criticisms. I do apologize to anybody who knows about feminisms in like intensive detail, but I am lumping a lot of different groups into one slide. This is a debating workshop, and a lot of these have enough commonalities that it is useful in a debating context. You wouldn't like normally put liberal feminism and girl boss feminism together. Anyways, the underlying principle of your liberal feminism, your like acceptable feminism, your girl boss feminism, the kind of like 2010s like modern feminism, is that women are as rational as men are, and thus are entitled to the same rights. That's your personal autonomy, your vote, your equal treatment before the law. This was a very foundational principle for your first wave of feminism. Liberal feminism and the other types of feminism that are here with your choice feminism, your girl boss feminism as well, think that the state is a referee. It doesn't interfere unnecessarily, but it does step in to stop massive discriminations happening. So it is in charge of making sure that nobody's being like hugely discriminatory, but it's not going to get involved in like the private sphere, right? Liberal feminists and like girl boss feminisms in particular, for the context of debating, and choice feminists view that they should work within a system using things like political campaigning and lobbying. So they're like very amenable to like the center, they're very amenable to compromise and things like that. And they generally are going for, well, we are exactly the same, we are just as capable as thinking rationally, and therefore we should be afforded the same rights that men are. So this is your very, very brief overview of what this feminism looks like. Does anyone have any questions about that? Anything I need to clarify?
When you say it doesn't interfere in the private sector,
so
you can be sexist at at Shell, but you can't be sexist in the government. Is that kind of the thing?
you can be sexist in your home, but you cannot be sexist in your workplace.
Gotcha.
Cool. Some criticisms. Liberal feminism and its offspring were very helpful for getting formal equality, recognition under the law, things like your right to vote. However, formal equality does not equal actual equality, right? Just because you have the right to vote does not mean that you are treated the same in the rest of your life. So it has proven historically to be insufficient in achieving full, like, substantive equality, right? It also adopts like what the norm is. So you've got your like standards of rationality, or your like objective standards, or the way that you have to act within the workplace. Very specifically, the ideology decided that assimilation of women was better than the differentiation and acceptance of differentiation. So the male standards were accepted and adopted, and the feminine qualities were disregarded and taken less seriously, which means that women who were socialized to have the feminine standards and not the masculine ones were disadvantaged because they didn't display those traits, right? There's also the neglection of the private sphere, because liberalism only cares about the public sphere, wants you to be as unregulated as possible because you're a rational being. In the context of the private sphere, that is where most of the household labor, caring labor, and the domestic violence takes place. So like these are things that liberal feminism and choice feminism and girl boss feminism are broadly not able to address just by nature of their like principal underpins. However, the principle of like just rights equally, automatically, autonomously, that doesn't rely on essential claims about sex or gender or race or anything like that, just you are a person, therefore you are entitled to rights, does still have some relevance and can be used in a way that is effective in campaigning, in debate, in society, in the law, everything like that. So don't completely discount it. It's important to know like about this, right? Any questions? Yay. Radical feminism. Okay, radical feminism believes that patriarchy is the central oppressive force for women and that sexuality is the central site of that oppression. If patriarchy is like the police officer, then sexual violence is the baton that the police officer is hitting you with, if that makes sense. Radical feminism argues that sexual violence and fear of sexual violence influences all aspects of a woman's life. Do you go out at night? Where do you go at night? How safe do you feel when you are there? How do you act online? And is your action determined in some way by trying to avoid like having digital sexual violence done upon you? Do you make friends with men? And if you don't make friends with men, is it because men have not been very nice to you? Things like that. So they argue that that is the central oppressive force, critiques the assertive dominant man stereotype, and that this is the like real sex type of thing. Radical feminism has historically had an emphasis on women's only spaces and campaigns, especially campaigns, because again, historically, the dangers of mixed gender campaigns is that the men were all sexist and were like, hello, women, do all the labor and we're not going to listen to your ideas. And they benefited from that labor without actually including women in like the campaigning process, right? In terms of like successes and where you can find their arguments in real life, arguments about sexual violence will have your radical feminist underpinnings. And very specifically in the UK, one of my favorite feminist movements, which is Reclaim the Night, which was in the 70s during the Yorkshire Ripper murders, where the police were like, hello, there's a serial killer attacking sex workers. And then women were like, hey, it's not just sex workers actually that's being targeted. And the police were like, we don't believe you. And then they realized that it was not in fact just sex workers that were being targeted. So they were like, hello, women, you should not leave your homes at night. And everyone was like, it's Yorkshire. It gets dark at 5 p.m. in the winter. What are we supposed to do? And they were like, eh. And then a bunch of women got pissed off that they were being told what to do by police officers that were incapable of catching a murderous man and went off on a 13-year detour. I have a lot of feelings about the Yorkshire Ripper, but Reclaim the Night was a radical feminist movement that did a lot to raise awareness of the double standards and the way that women were forced to take responsibility for men's bad behavior in terms of doing things to protect themselves instead of society telling men that it's not okay to that it's not okay to be awful to women and it's not okay to do sexual violence. So that is where you can find it. Questions? Yeah.
This might seem like a silly question.
There is no such thing.
The reclaiming.
Yes.
Separate thing, take back the movement.
Same, very similar principles, similar underpiece. Take Back the Night, is that in the UK or somewhere else?
Well, that was in the US.
In the US, yeah. Possibly they're inspired by each other. Very specifically, the offspring of Reclaim the Night is Reclaim These Streets, which happened in 2021 after Sarah Everard was murdered. Because the exact same like narrative by the police was happening. So people were like, we're going to, do a little spin on this. But yes, if it is of that type of variety, it's got your radical feminist underpinnings there because it's critiquing sexual violence as like the main cause of oppression. Yeah. Liberal feminism and radical feminism, in my opinion, enemies to lovers. Like a lot of these feminisms, these different campaigns worked with each other to do things. So you would have seen radical feminists doing let's get votes. You would have seen liberal feminists doing, hey, we should be like safe. This isn't necessarily like, they're not inherently opposed to each other. But it's just like the principle that a group was coming from being extrapolated out into a debate context, if that makes sense. Some liberals would have had a problem with it. If radical feminists were like, hey, we should have more legislation to stop domestic violence, liberals who are also feminists would have probably been like, that sucks, we shouldn't do that. But like, they're not going to be at odds with each other, because generally feminism as a movement is broadly working to the same thing, even if there's some infighting. Okay? Yay. So here's some some criticisms of liberal feminism. Our definition and understanding of what a woman is increasingly nuanced, and radical feminism struggles to keep up with the increasingly nuanced definition of a woman without falling into biological essentialism. Many women experience other sources of oppression they would class as their main source of oppression, specifically race, class, and disability. And radical feminism, historically, also unable to keep up with that, because it is saying that womanhood is or gender is the thing that you are oppressed by. And then there's a bunch of people being like, well, actually, as a disabled woman, I'm actually experiencing more oppression because of my disability than because of my gender. They have felt the need to either choose to be a radical feminist or to be the other type of advocator. So it kind of discouraged them from like combining those two factors of identity to like get your clarity or get your like momentum going, right? Can turn into all men bad, all women good, which is your biological essentialism thing. Biological essentialism essentially is the idea that like women have vagina and tit, and man has penis, and the things that they have also means they're going to have all of these characteristics personality-wise, and things that they are good at and things that they are bad at. And it can kind of end up boiling down to all men have penises and are therefore offenders, and all women have vaginas and are therefore victims, which sucks because it's not true. And also it creates JK Rowling. So we decide. Yeah, again, encourages, it can encourage women to identify only with bad experiences with men, and it can reinforce a stereotype of women as passive victims and reduce women's sexual agency, right? Think about the Sabrina Carpenter thing. If she is enjoying herself in that picture, a radical feminist would still critique it and be like, she's not empowered. But if Sabrina Carpenter could quite easily stand up and be like, no, I was empowered in that situation. I had full control and I like what I'm doing, which probably is what she would do. A radical feminist would still critique it, and that to some people would be undermining Sabrina Carpenter's sexual agency and her way of expressing her sexuality, right? Questions? Yes.
How would this deal with same-sex sexual violence, you know?
Yeah, it struggles.
Okay.
It struggles. Yeah, it really just does. Another thing in the other sources of oppression, like it is just really yeah. Faux feminisms. You have your gender critical feminism, which is also known as trans exclusionary radical feminism. These are people who have started in radical feminism and have gone way too far with it and have like adopted the fallacy of all men bad, all women good. And then they have also adopted like your second thing of trans people existing is a threat to that because of biological essentialism. If you are born with a penis, you must be a man, and therefore you are bad, and so you are not allowed in my space. Listen, it's a relatively incoherent as an ideology. There is a very good book that I will recommend to you at the end by Judith Butler that deconstructs transphobic rhetoric in the thing of feminism. And there will be a reading list that is at the end that talks about this. But in general, it is a form of feminism that does not believe that trans people are what they say they are and attempts to get trans women in particular excluded from women's spaces because they are a threat to cis women, which is not true. Trans women are significantly more likely to experience sexual violence than cis women, 60% to 30%, I believe, and are the most marginalized women in the world, I would argue, and we should protect them and like not be evil at them, but hey-ho, I'm not J.K. Rowling. Your second one is white feminisms. This is a type of feminism that is broadly as well also like mainstream or liberal from like where it comes from, that focuses on the experiences and identities of white middle class cis heterosexual women as a universal experience. In the same way that feminism critiques men as default, women as other, this type of thing adopts white as default, anything else as other, which is not true or fair. And so it uses the language of liberation without examining the intersections of privilege that could mean that I, as a white woman, have more privilege and power than a black man, for example. And the ability to like do that. If you are only thinking about white people, you're doing a white feminism, and that's not good. Pinkwashing is usually used by companies where they promote feminism in a like on the surface way without doing actual good feminist things. So if a company is being like, wow, we love Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but then they're also not giving you maternity leave, they're doing pinkwashing, which is bad because it is co-opting the image of feminism to make you think that they are good, and they are in fact evil, which all companies are, but hey, and then individualist feminisms, which is basically like similar again to your girl boss feminism, where the woman as the individual is like centered as opposed to like a more collectivist idea. They are feminisms because they put women in competition with each other in the exact same way that patriarchy puts women in competition with each other. Because under patriarchy, women are in competition in order to have access to like men with money and who aren't abusive. And in this individualist capacity, they are again at competition with each other, which encourages them to like re-perpetuate patriarchy and sexism as they attempt to get ahead. Generally, a feminism co-opts a narrative of feminism without commitment to the underlying principles, and it can contradict and undermine the goals of feminism in doing so. Make sense? Yes.
What makes individualist feminism different from like girl boss?
I would say that if your girl boss feminism is going, I am a woman and I have just the same rights as a man, and so I should have the same things as a man, that's probably like a girl boss feminism. And if your girl boss is going like, I am the most important person in the world, and also I happen to be a woman, and also I'm going to slut shame people, then that's maybe an individualist feminism thing. It's like, again, your Venn diagram is going to be, there's going to be some like going over there, and it's kind of difficult to like distinguish, but that's helpful in a debate context, because if you are like, oh hey, I need to critique this thing that looks like liberal feminism, you can go to your individualist feminism and be like, hey, that sucks because of these reasons. Cool? Yippee. Okay. Marxist feminism, socialist feminism, leftist feminisms. This is where I'm doing the most heresy, because these have all such different origins and things like that, but we just have to lump them all together. So the broad push from these groups is that capitalism depends on the subordination of women, particularly through their unpaid work at home, keeping the male workers productive, and unpaid reproductive labor, which is producing the next generation of poorly paid workers and unpaid women. So broadly, they support measures that liberate women from economic exploitation as their like first priority in both the public and the private spheres, because they recognize that labor you do in the home is labor. Women do annually across the world $6 billion of unpaid domestic and caring labor. Last calculation, I can't remember exactly, but that's the number that's coming off my brain. If I'm wrong, I guess I'll get cancelled on the internet. So they look at that and are like, hey, that's not fair. They also focus on the interests of the working class primarily, as opposed to like liberal feminists that focus more on the middle class. And they are collectivist rather than individualist. Their campaigns were things like abortion access, as well as you will find people who identify as any of these types of feminists or more in any leftism, because that's where we live and that's where we like to. Does that all make sense? Yeah.
How is this comparative? Like, presumably, if capitalism was gone, women would still have to like.
Yeah. So radical feminism is like, hey, the main thing that oppresses women is sexual violence. Leftist feminists are like, hey, the main thing that oppresses women is money. And so the best way to get women to be more liberated is to stop capitalism from doing its like thing. In terms of like how that practicality has panned out, again, a lot of overlap, especially between radical feminists and socialist feminists. Radical feminism is an offshoot of socialist feminism because the socialists were not listening to women in socialist, and then they were like, well, we're going to go do our own thing now. But like the point of it is to critique like the capitalist system that requires women and especially people with uteruses to do the production of new workers, which is why they for the abortion access thing is to be like, we are critiquing this because it furthers the economic exploitation of women, and that's the most important thing to deal with. It's weighing, basically. They just do the weighing differently. Yeah.
Just on this specifically, there are also actual like implementable things that you see different in socialist or centrally planned economies that do vary from capitalism. So this is things like in the Soviet Union doing like state-funded or collective childcare and things like that. So there are ways that this can manifest differently than just how capitalism treats women, I suppose.
Hell yeah.
Do Marxist feminists support things like maternity pay or childcare, or do they just believe it repropagates like subjugation?
They would support it because those things mean that women aren't like forced. I mean, yes and no. Like, I think it would very much depend on who you were talking to, just like with all leftism. And if you like threw a policy at them, their response would be different. On the one hand, they'd support it because it means that women aren't, for example, dependent on a husband because they have access to like your maternity care. On the other hand, they might be against it because it incentivizes women to go and do that childbearing role. It could be either, it could be both. It again depends on like the principle, the underlying principle where they're coming from, their lived experience as well, why they have the opinion that they have. Yes.
Wait, I might be missing something, but it seems so much more like reliant on money because it feels like you like if you institute some sort of like if men do like more, I guess, unpaid work at home and then women get more pay, it feels like this is solved without solving any of the actual issues with like the patriarchy and all of that. Like it still feels like there'd be so many issues when you still technically solve these complaints.
Well, one of the problems that the patriarchy creates is that women do more unpaid labor in the home than men.
Sure.
And that women are like don't have money. So if things were changed in a way that women had more money and men did more labor, that starts to create some degree of like equalization.
I think something that's relevant here is that a lot of feminist scholars think that there is a relationship between the kinds of intimate violence that Helen mentions, like the radical feminists talking about within the home as a tool of coercing women to perform domestic labor because of the threat of violence existing within the home. So there is a relationship between these two things.
I thought I'd just push back against Gunda's example of the Soviet Union. It's a good point generally, but the Soviet Union was actually legendarily terrible at providing the kind of things that required women. They were kind of viewed as an untapped workforce after the war because so many men died, and then women were kind of brought into the workforce as replacements, but then kept in the doing domestic labor as well. So you got the double burden, and it's kind of still a problem in Russia today. So while there was some kind of support, it was woefully underdeveloped and actually a terrible problem.
Which is why you need to have women in the rooms making decisions when you're deciding things. Not a problem that is unique to Russia as well. The reason that socialists supported equal pay for women when that campaign was happening was because women being paid less was undercutting the value of men's labor, and not because they like cared in any significant way about women being paid equally. Yeah, shit sucks, man. Any further questions, comments about this? Thank you for all the questions and contributions, by the way. It's super great. Okay. Yay, criticisms. Leftist infighting. If you are a leftist, you know what I mean. They will not stop fighting with each other, and it's really annoying. So the problems of different ideas on the left wing about theories and what's more important and who's more important and what exactly we should be doing, and should we be doing a revolution, should we wait for the decaying of the state, all of that is also a problem in the feminist sections of leftism, and can broadly reduce momentum in the movement, slow it down, stop it from getting progress, and undermine it in the view of its like audience, people that it's trying to appeal to. And it's also very annoying. Men also created socialist and Marxist theories, and women adopted them and had to fit themselves into it instead of creating something, having something created for them, by them, for them. And within those campaigns, men typically exclude, brackets id, women, the same thing of like relying on their unpaid labor in order to and a famous example of like there was a massive socialist like meeting, and at the end of the meeting the men were still having their conversation, but it was like time to clear up, so all the women were clearing up and the men were just still having their conversation. So the women were the ones clearing up and going like off to do the dishes, and the women and the men were the ones that were still having their conversation and their like intellectual discussion. A similar but personal anecdote is I was at an encampment a couple of years ago for no reason at all. And what I would do is when we got to the portion of the day where we were cleaning up, I would notice that there were many more feminine people who were doing the cleaning up. So I would go and I would get up to people and I would point at them and I'd be like, you have to go and do 3 cleaning tasks before you're allowed to sit back down in this chair, and bullied everybody into doing their fair share of labor on the encampment. Otherwise it would not, well, I'm not going to say it would not have happened. It would be much less likely to happen if you don't have somebody actively doing that. So within like the left wing, very easy to take that for granted, continues to be a problem. Yeah. And also they have relatively little to say about women who are not in the nuclear family, women who are unmarried, women who are lesbians, because so much of the foundation of it is like women in the nuclear family who are doing all this unpaid work for their husband and who are producing children. Less to say about lesbians, less to say about people who are unmarried. Questions? Yes.
If there's like a strand of Marxist feminism that is just advocating that the way in which capital is given and organized is one that unfairly does not account for the labor of women, and hence just believe it's a system of capital needs to be changed, then yeah, they probably support childcare and stuff like that. But if there's another group of Marxist feminists who believes that capitalism inherently leads to subjugation of women, how do they make that link? Like what do they say is inherent to capitalism that cannot be solved through just like state market means that still lead to the subjugation?
Is unpaid labor expectation an answer there? I feel like I've been given a scary question on Jeopardy. I don't know. I think that it's like even in systems that don't have capitalism and don't have money, there's like the unpaid expectation, even just like the labor of being pregnant and giving birth, not being compensated, emotional labor, like artistic stuff as well, stuff that's traditionally feminine being devalued, being seen to have less economic or social value just inherently. Like that's the other type of thing that is being criticized. Yes.
There is also an element, a lot of the roles that we care work with vulnerable people are productive for capitalism.
Yeah.
You have a vulnerable population that isn't going to produce for you, and the responsibility of that population, be it kids, elderly people, generally care work, is traditionally acceptable. So there is an element like that work being paid is beneficial to capitalism because in the productive route.
Yeah, especially when it comes to care work, because childcare is nurturing the next generation of workers. If you have your children and they are healthy and they are strong and they are well developed, they're going to be better workers. The state doesn't want to take the responsibility of doing that, so it's left unpaid into the private sphere where women take that responsibility. Elder care, that is just not paying people pensions properly, not having proper social security nets, forcing that labor to be on women as well, because humans have empathy and are going to care for their family members. It's a way for the state to disregard responsibility, which is why socialist feminisms do not think that the public and the private sphere should have a distinction. Okay.
It's maybe somewhat of a reiteration of previous questions, but outside of capitalism and before capitalism, the state still had a vested interest in coercing reproductive labor out of feminized people.
Yeah.
How do you talk about the economic incentives around that without using Marxist analysis? Or is there a way you can still do it without it being about capitalism?
I think like, are you thinking like in a historical context or in like a current context that's not capitalist?
Either one, both.
Historical context, I would say look at the historical things that existed there. So like in a feudalism time, women were property. And so the prospect of marriage was an economic one, where women didn't have rights to inheritance. If their father died, well, first of all, when you were born, you are the right of your father. You are the property of your father. And then when he dies, his inheritance is going to his sons, your brothers, and you are not getting any of it. So what you have to do is marry a man who is going to provide for you, because you are property. And at the point that you marry, you are going to cease to be the property of your father and be the property of your husband. And then you're going to just do that. And then if your husband dies, you're going to become the property of your son or your brother, depending. And you don't have the right to do any of those things. So in a historical context, I would say that it is like that type of thing that I would look to specifically what the context is and what rights women did and did not have. In a non-capitalist current context, if the system had money, like even if it wasn't capitalism, if it had money, it probably had something that you could critique from this lens. And if the system does not have money, it definitely had labor and the reimbursement for labor, and is probably unequal depending on gender, depending on what specific labor is being done as well. And so like I would go for that angle, if that makes sense. Okay, very quickly on Black feminism, queer theory, intersectional feminism. Most of these feminisms do not really account for a different myriad of identities very well. Your socialist feminism wasn't really able to account for lesbians, for example. So the response to that comes from Black feminism, queer theory, intersectional feminism. These are the broad pushes here. Again, this is not a lecture on these like specifically as much as it is the thing that's helpful in the debate. So they challenge the assumption that white women's experiences and goals are universal. And they say that by focusing only on sexism, we ignore the effects of racism, homophobia, ableism, fatphobia, and I said vice versa. I meant and so on. And so on. We ignore the fact that there are people who are marginalized in more than one way, who experience that marginalization in a different way than someone who is not marginalized in that way. We ignore privilege as like a concept, right? They also, especially queer theory, like deconstruct the idea of sex and gender in general, and argue that the regulation of sex, gender, sexuality, sexual activity are all related. They all come from the same intention, which is let's do more patriarchy, and that they enforce your nuclear family cis heteronormativity, which is a real word and one of my favorites. This has become more and more relevant in this decade. You see it in, you see Black feminism in particular in your 2020 Black Lives Matter protests. You see your queer theory in trans rights movements. Most people who are practicing feminism today will have some degree of intersectionality because it is just widely accepted that if you don't, you're not doing feminism well, and that you are letting people down. If you are not doing intersectionality in some way, you are assuming that white women are the default, and you are making completely invisible women and gender minorities, gender minorities at all, and anybody that is not white, which is bad because those people also need feminism and also could be benefited by a feminist movement. Questions, comments? Keeping it brief because I, again, do have a train, but yes.
So probably the only comment is I think that often there's a tendency to view some of these things, I think particularly with Black feminism as like new, when I think that really often it's a question of like platforming and access to the channels of media that Black women had asymmetric access to. Yes,
I think that intersectionality was in the 70s, the phrase was coined. So it's been around for a very long time. And the idea of intersectionality was coined by a Black woman. Her name unfortunately does escape me, but it is becoming more relevant now, but it has been around for as long as everything else and is just as important and is one of my favorite types personally, as everything else. Okay. All right. Some critiques. Intersectionality can force us to decide which identities matter most, as it is applied to more and more identities. This is my favorite, that's derogatory, thing of oppression Olympics, that people who are very annoying on Twitter will sometimes play with you about like which identity is the most oppressed and therefore that we should care about. Not a productive way of looking at activism, not a productive way of looking at equal rights frameworks. Generally has not encouraged coalition building outside of identity categories. Also, just like conceptually, requires us to stabilize identities. So requires us to have a clear understanding of what a lesbian is, right? Like a set understanding of what lesbian is, whereas there are lots of people who will not fit that definition who identify as lesbians. In general, people have identities that don't fit into strict boxes, especially with queer people. That's kind of the point. And intersectionality being like everybody must have a label for all of these things doesn't take into account necessarily all of those nuances, therefore doesn't always exactly address what we need it to address. Queer theory in particular, and its focus on sexual liberation, can put it into conflict with radical feminism. And queer theory's methods of destruction, which are focused on personal behavior, just like dressing in a way that is androgynous or against your gender roles a lot of the time, feel very liberal. An interesting thing about this in terms of like the queer movement and the feminist movement is, should marriage happen? When queer people were starting to argue that they should have access to marriage, feminists argued that marriage as that this would be harmful because it would reinforce marriage for the next generation, that marriage in of itself was a bad thing because of the way that it enforced gender roles and the way that it historically oppressed women and the way that it stopped you from getting access to like certain like everything, and a whole bunch of other reasons as to why marriage was bad. And the two came into some degree of conflict because queer theorists were like, hey, we've just lived through HIV/AIDS, where not having spousal rights meant we could not see our loved ones while they were dying, and that is bad. And so the two were ideologically in conflict with each other for some time. Queer theory ended up like winning that, I guess, but like there was a time that the conflict between those came into focus, and there was a motion at Euros this year that I was very excited by because it was about liberation versus assimilation, where this type of thing was helpful for debaters. None of them in my room, but was helpful for debaters because it allows you to look at an issue and critique it from another angle. So if you have a feminist motion and you can't think of any other feminist things, think about what queer theory would say about that issue. And if you have a queer issue and you can't think about any other stuff that you can address from a queer perspective, think about what feminists would say about the issue. Yeah, I love it. Okay. Feminist movements you should know very quickly. 4B, South Korea. This is a form of radical feminism that is known as lesbian separatism, which has existed for as long as radical feminism has, as much as people are pretending it is not. The 4B movement is essentially a sex boycott. The B's stand for sex relationships, child rearing, childbearing, something like that. Basically, it is one of them is friends with men. Okay. Basically, it is a separatist movement. It's a very extreme separatist movement of radical feminism, being like, hey, these men suck, and so we are not going to deal with them. And then the men have been mad about that because what they want to do is like fuck and not have consequences, and realized they could not do that, and they were very mad. Your suffragettes and your suffragists, this was especially prominent in the 1900s to the 1920s, and they were your votes for women people with insert regional variation here. Suffragettes, some of my favorite, they blew up letterboxes and attacked the Prime Minister with a golf club. And one person who was called Mary Slasher Richardson, she got the slash name afterward, went and slashed a painting that depicted Venus because it depicted her nude, and she was like, this sucks. The suffragettes were extreme, and they did like what would probably be classified as terrorism today in order to get votes for women. And the suffragists were the ones who were like, hey, women are people, please give us rights. The two of them worked together in order for some women to get the right to vote around about the First World War. Please, like, notable that a lot of Western countries giving votes to women did not give votes to all women. I think it was women property owners that got rights the first time, and it expanded out to other varieties of women before universal franchise was given in like 40s, 30s, 40s. So their achievement broke the glass ceiling, but it was not universal. Working class women, after they had finished, did not have the right to vote. That came later. The Mothers de Plaza de Mayo was an Argentinian movement that was the mothers of people who had been the victims of gang violence and disappearings and stuff like that, intersected with government corruption. And they were essentially like, hey, my child has been disappeared and the state does not care. I'm angry about that. And they campaigned and achieved some degree of change in that like context where they were like, this sucks, and proved how mothers could like be a force for social change and social good. Kalnari is how I'm going to hope that's pronounced, was an Indian movement that empowered and campaigned for the rights of widowed or childless or like other women that had been cast aside by society. It was started by someone who had been widowed, and she looked around and saw that there were a bunch of other people who had been widowed or who were unmarried, and were like,
Are you using the other rooms as well?
yes, we will be. Yeah.
That's fine, no worries.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so saw the lack of social autonomy, lack of economic autonomy, and was like, this sucks, started a movement about it. Malala Yousafzai and girls' education, something that most of you should be aware of. Malala was like, hello, the Taliban is taking away my rights to education, and I would like it. And the Taliban was like, here is a bullet in your face. And then Malala was like, fuck you, I'm alive, and I'm a Nobel laureate now. And she is very cool. So she campaigned for girls' education, saying that discriminatory policies in Pakistan and then around the world were bad. She is still an active feminist today, and she does a lot of pointing out of like outside of your Anglo-centric context, feminist issues. So she's really cool. Women Life Freedom in Iran has emerged kind of post the Islamic Revolution of the 70s and continuing to gain prominence. I think 2021, they had a really big surge, and that is, again, critiquing the repression of women with the religious justification that was used to repress women, and doing a lot of like things like removing the hijab to show that they should have the right to make a choice about whether or not what they should be allowed to wear and stuff like that. Very cool. Had some government unrest happening about it because they are so cool. And then in Kenya, the Green Belt movement was ecofeminism. The creator of it was like, let's plant a bunch of trees and also tell the government to fuck off. And then they planted a bunch of trees and told the government to fuck off. And that has been a like ideological parent of a lot of your eco-feminist stuff that's happening. They shouldn't really talk about here, but they were like, hello, we're all connected to the earth, and the earth should be healthy. And when climate change happens, it sucks for women, especially in all different ways. So let's not do that, please. And that originates from Kenya. So that is some movements that you should know about. That is obviously not an exhaustive list. I've tried to be as international as possible as well. But questions before I move on? Yes?
Kind of comment for the suffragettes and suffragists, so many people focus on the UK and US, but I feel like it's important to recognize that like New Zealand was the first one to actually do it.
Yes, yeah, for sure. New Zealand was the first one that gave women suffrage in, I think it might have been like the 1890s.
Yeah.
It was a good moment ahead of. But we're in the UK right now, and that's the one I have the most expertise on because I am British, and I didn't want to just talk about suffrage, even though like if you Google most important feminist movements, a lot of them will be the suffrage movement for a different country. I wanted to like a bunch of different ideological things, a bunch of different locations as well. Some that are ongoing, some that have had regression recently, like the moral arc of the universe does not necessarily go towards gender equality, but these are important movements that we can all know about. Okay, exercise. Which feminism do you think closely aligns with which topic and why? It's going to show you a bunch of topics. We don't have time to go through all of them. So you're going to choose one, and then you're going to tell me, and I want contributions from everyone because no one's opted out of filming. Ready? Okay. Yes.
This is mainly just because it kind of talks about the double standard, or like the duality. That would the thing that means two of the thing. Between women being seen as either like pure or religious, whatever, or like defiled and things like that. So it relates very closely to the idea of sex as the primary weapon by which women are oppressed. Stuff like that.
Hell yeah. Very good.
One relates to leftist feminism with the idea of individuality versus the wider problems in society. So leftist feminists would say even if it's an individualistic choice to partake in it, it's still a bad thing because it shows the society that has created that kind of choice. And so there's a wider problem towards influence women to make that choice. and how that is a bad thing.
Would you say that that is leftist or radical? Because I think that both can apply, but the justification you've given me sounds more like radical feminism.
Yeah, I guess if you want to need that, take more economic.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
the economic rotation of women is a justification for why it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
One conflict probably relates more to the Marxists and socialists because, well, capitalism is a driving force for a lot of conflict, and colonialism in particular to relate to Palestine too again.
For religion's probably radical feminism, because if patriarchy is the central oppressive force for women, religion is like the way that it was spread in a lot of ways.
I would argue as well intersectional feminism. There is conversation among religious people, religious feminists in particular, about if religion and feminism can coexist or if they create too much of a dissonance. One of the books I'm recommending is called Do Muslim Women Need Saving? That addresses this and how those work together. But yes, also there are multiple answers, and there are some answers that I don't have. So I'm more just interested to hear what your thoughts are. Yes.
Sex segregation in sport is so much fun because the fact that it exists is an outcropping of one feminist success. And now the fact that it exists is a problem for intersectional feminism. Because it's causing, a bunch of controversy about transgenderism, how sex is identified, and then also in terms of race, like some people are suggesting tests for sex segregation that are particularly discriminatory against Black women who might have higher levels of testosterone, or just there's an insane number of people who probably are chromosomally intersex who just don't know that because they've never had a chromosome test. And so as chromosome testing is rising, there are more and more people who are discovering that as an issue, especially around sport.
Yeah. And it's especially important to note there, just as a fun Judith Butler book plug, because they talk about it, is that the idea of femininity is a white Western one that was imposed via colonialism violently on the rest of the world. So our standard of what femininity is how closely does it resemble a white Western woman. There are going to be a lot of women of color that for whatever reason do not meet those standards of femininity, height, build, facial shape, facial length, hair, anything like that, that do not meet a standard and therefore are scrutinized as or mislabeled as trans women when they are in fact cis women. And that it is a way to violently, colonially prioritize privileged white women as your standard of beauty, your normalcy of what womanhood looks like, shut out the rest of the world, which sucks. And on behalf of white people, I apologize. Yes.
Role models is a liberal feminist issue because it puts the onus of enacting feminism onto the individual.
Yep, very cool. Yeah.
Beauty industry and cosmetics feels like something that expands through all forms, because on one hand there's this pressure from the patriarchy on women to conform to a certain image of, oh, I wear lipstick, makeup, etc. And then on the idea of certain factions of feminism, with gender critical feminism or white feminists who have ideas on this is what I should look like, with oppressors, particularly non-white women on color and skin color, hair types, etc.
Yeah. Anybody else? Stay now.
I'm paying it to my wire range, so I have it. I don't think about it for tomorrow morning, so I have it.
There we go.
I will now think about it.
Okay,
Give me
thanks.
2 minutes.
Does anybody have, does everybody know what we mean when we say glass ceiling, glass elevator, glass cliff? All three of those? Yeah.
Usually liberal feminism.
Yes, it's glass ceiling, for those who are uninitiated, is the concept there is an invisible barrier where women are underneath but not on top. Breaking the glass ceiling is getting access to an upper echelon of access to power, usually a title. If you think about a woman president would have broken the glass ceiling, for example. Glass elevator is used to describe a phenomenon where in female-dominated industries, men entering the industry are given a fast track up to levels of power. This is why this is used to explain why most of your teachers are women, but most of your head teachers are men. If you think of your primary school, your high school, it's quite likely that your head teacher or your senior staff were more men than women, when most of your teachers are women rather than men. Glass cliff is what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter right now. It's when you have fucked something up really, really badly and you know it's going to fail. So you put a woman in charge so that when it fails, it's blamed on her and not on you. And that is insidious. And it is used to like delegitimize that particular woman as someone who is unable to like keep Twitter working when in fact it was Elon Musk that killed it. Yes.
There's an interesting frustration in the fashion world just because of the most recent season of Project Runway with the glass elevator. But basically, gay men tend to just soar to the top of the fashion world way faster than women, even though there's way more female fashion designers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. 100% good example of it. Yeah.
And just for like using it in debates, you have any other good examples of like glass cliff?
Of what, sorry?
Of the glass cliff thing. Where, like,
Glass cliff. Ooh, not ones that I can point to like right now, but your underlying thing is when a company or a country is going to fail, and so a woman is put in charge. You text me about it, I will find more examples and send them to you. But Elon Musk and the CEO of Twitter would be probably an example that most people would relate to and understand. Yes.
Awesome. Colton, who's got his hand up, he's looking for
Oh, sorry. Hello.
I like heard this and then I like thought of it immediately, but now I'm considering, I don't really know, but the Democratic nomination, like the fact that Biden kind of just like fucked everyone by choosing to run,
Yeah.
and at the very last minute made it Harris's problem,
Yeah.
and then she had 100 days to run an election and lost.
Yes.
And now it's her fault.
Yes.
When in reality, he should have just like,
Yeah. Arguably a glass cliff situation as well. Absolutely.
This happens all the time in politics. Like you can basically just point to the decline of a woman and you can see that it's not actually a decline of a woman. But recently in the UK, Theresa May and the Brexit negotiations.
Theresa May is a very good example of glass cliff. Yep. Cool.
Where do you draw the line between glass cliff and incompetence? Because if Theresa May is one, but no one would call Liz Truss one, she's just incompetent. Where is that line there?
I think that
or is Theresa May also?
Liz Truss is, in my opinion, a psyop. I think Liz Truss decided that she was going to infiltrate the Conservative Party to show how insane they were, and then it did not work because none of them noticed, and then just, I guess, fucked things up and ran away. I think it's context dependent. I think that this is an explanation of phenomena, and there will be examples that fit into it and examples that do not fit into it. Seriously speaking, Liz Truss is probably just an example of someone who is incompetent, but also could be an example of privilege, right? Because she was running against a man of color. So it's very possible that Tory voters chose somebody who was less competent. And actually, in this situation, it's Rishi Sunak that was on the glass cliff because he was the one that succeeded her. So it's possible that it's an example of privilege, and her incompetence, yet the fact that she was white, privileged her over somebody who was less incompetent, equally incompetent, but in a different direction. Unclear. Also evil, rich and evil, and fucked things up. Not entirely. That's a difficult. Tories are so fascinating. Why are they like that? Anyway. But yes.
I was just gonna say, I do think it was still a bit glass cliff. At the time the Conservative Party was doing terrible, they did choose to have Liz Truss and then Kwasi Kwarteng to another chancellor. I do think it was a bit of a glass cliff scenario because it's very easy to put the blame on them.
Yeah.
This would probably help because they were also massively incompetent.
Yeah.
Just
Kemi Badenoch, glass cliff.
quick pushback. How does it work with an election? Because I didn't actually think she was internally elected, right?
Yes.
So how does that work? Because that presumes that everyone in the look, I don't give the Tories credit for much,
Yeah.
but I will give them credit for. I don't think they elect someone who they think is likely to fail, and they want a woman to fail over Sunak or a woman to fail over someone else. Like they do have an incentive to succeed. So how does that work in an electoral system when it's not Elon Musk putting him in to cover his ass?
Do you have a response to this?
Yeah, the point that could just be made is that because women find it very difficult in normal times to be able to get into positions of power, when there is a position of power where it is very, very risky to get in, a lot of women, I think, end up taking that trade-off personally. Yeah, but because they haven't had, because they have the position, which is why it's easier to be to believe I won't do this because it's hard, because other people just aren't really stepping up for the role.
Yeah. Glass ceiling, glass cliff, glass elevator. It's unconscious bias a lot of the time. Like formally, legally, there's equal rights there, but a lot of the time it's unconscious bias happening there. Yes.
So they were on the decline when she replaced. So,
Yes.
like, the party was gonna die.
Mhm.
They weren't gonna win the next election. So you may as well just have a better shot at coming back. So blame it on somebody who wasn't super well known and was already known for making mistakes.
Yeah.
I still think that is a bit like hindsight's 2020. I don't think we could have known Liz Truss fell as monstrously as she did. That it was
No, we
so-
could have.
So
We could have.
knew the Tory party
But
was
that's
going to win the next election. Is the point. We didn't know that Liz Truss.
That's
true.
Like
But
everybody.
had she done well, then it's a different story, though. I mean, she did a bank run, you know, at that point, you had she done reasonably, then maybe they would.
I mean, like, I think I think that your structural analysis here is that in general elections, there is a very strong anti-incumbent sentiment. That people are going to vote against the incumbent party because they don't like it for whatever reason. And if you are then going to be choosing a leader mid-term, if you are choosing a woman and you are not accounting for the anti-incumbent sentiment, you are doing a glass cliff. It doesn't, like, the individual thing, nuances of it could be different. But if Keir Starmer goes tomorrow and Rachel Reeves gets put in his place, that's arguably a glass cliff because Keir Starmer has fucked up the Labour Party and everyone would just wail on Rachel Reeves and blame her for Labour Party's decline, right? Yes.
Okay, so there are a few like examples, I can't remember like specific companies where they like throw a woman on the glass cliff and then like he makes the company do well.
Yeah.
And then immediately after that, she's like removed from her position and like a man replaces her. What is that like an example of? Because that doesn't really fall exactly under any of the categories, and obviously it's rare, so it's more rare because you know a lot of things have to happen, but
Good for her. I don't really know if it can be put into the same like structural phenomena as the ones that we're talking about here. I think it's just like, wow.
well, but then also like I mean more so of like what is the replacement of her after she's done well?
Oh,
try to take credit.
that's sexism.
But I mean,
Good old fashioned sexism. Generally just being like, women are not competent enough to do this job, so we're gonna put them, maybe nepotism, depending on what the situation is. I don't think I'd be able to give it like a glass
no fancy
name.
class, right?
I don't have a fancy glass name for it, sorry. Sorry, I failed you. I'm gonna go and remove all of those essays from my database. One more and then we need to move on.
I just wanted to think about like I saw Palestine and it made me think of like instances where both in queer kind of debates and in feminism, where like people are demonized for supporting a certain group because that group doesn't support them.
Yeah.
How would you kind of talk about that kind of thing?
So the feminist argument for Palestine is that Palestinians are people and people should not be genocided. But specifically a feminist like critique, specifically feminist issues about Palestine are massive amounts of sexual violence that are conducted by the occupation forces against the indigenous women and children of Palestine. The fact that in Gaza there is just no access to healthcare and there is no access to basic menstrual products. Women in Gaza don't have pads and tampons. And this is a huge issue. When women don't have access to menstrual products, it cuts them out from participating in society in the way that they would want to for a quarter of their lives, because they are in general like separated, either literally separated or by feelings of like shame or grossness or stuff like that. Children are being attacked and persecuted. That's a feminist issue because like it's just it's a feminist issue and children should not be attacked. The way that people kind of try to do a gotcha is they're going to like Western activists and being like, in Palestine, you would be thrown off a building for being gay. This is bullshit. And this is like a debate fallacy that's kind of like whataboutism, where they are pointing to a fact that there might be socially regressive views in among Palestinian people as a way to get you to stop caring about Palestinian people. Whether or not Palestinian people are homophobic or misogynistic, they should not be genocided because they are people and inherently they have value and do not deserve to be treated the way that they're being treated. It might well be that there is like queerphobia taking place, but it's not like Israel is good either. Gay marriage isn't legal in Israel. They recognize gay marriages from outside Israel, but it's not legal and it's violently homophobic. And there's rampant sexual violence among their like service members, which is going to translate outside of service in some way. There are pictures of occupation soldiers posing in women's lingerie in buildings that they have ransacked, which mocks it doesn't only mock like the victims themselves, it mocks their sexuality, it's a violation, it's using something that was incredibly intimate to these people in order to make fun of them. It's every activist issue is Palestine right now because there are all these different ways. And the gay people in Gaza are being killed by Israel. They're not being killed by homophobia. The women are being killed by Israel and not homophobia. And like specifically, the disadvantaged groups already get more disadvantaged by conflict, while Israel is pretending that it is a bastion of equality, the only democracy in the Middle East, remember, when it is in fact not, and is in fact perpetuating the type of violence that feminists critique. Yes?
Obstetric care.
Say again, sorry?
Obstetric care.
Would you define that for me, Jeopardy style, please?
Access to maternal health care
Gotcha.
services, safety giving birth.
Yeah.
Feminist studies.
Yes, yeah. If you don't have access to anesthetic, if you don't have access to a clean place to give birth, you know, the use of toxic chemical weapons on Palestinian civilians is meaning that babies are being born like deformed. It's like Agent Orange from Vietnam. It's that type of thing. It is, yeah, and you can come about it from a uniquely feminist perspective and point it out these ways. You can come at it from the perspective of a human being with empathy, but it is an incredibly serious feminist issue. And no matter what happens, feminists should be keeping their eyes on Palestine, because if you look at your, I'm an anarchist, so if you look at your broad system of society, you've got your patriarchy, it's cis heteronormative and it does colonialism. Palestine is having colonialism done upon it. It links back to the broader spectrum of oppression. Nobody is free until Palestine is free, right? That's your mantra. And so that's why that's a feminist issue. That's why it should be a feminist issue from all perspectives, especially from leftist or intersectional feminists, though, to relate back to the task. Anything else? Okay, free Palestine. Types of feminism debates. Ideology, movement, actor is WGM, and secret fourth thing. I'm going to go through each of these. I'm going to explain to you how to win these debates as best I can. How to win ideology debates. This is the type of debate where you'll be given an ideology or a policy that closely relates to that ideology, and you will be told, debate this. If you are government, you explain the justification for this, hopefully with reference to the stuff that we've talked about before, the underlying principles, defend the underlying principles, explain the type of benefit a campaign like this would create, and do your weighing. Weighing is very important in social movements debates in general, and especially when you have competing ideologies or competing like feminism's principles of ideologies happening here, right? So you got to do your weighing. If you are opposition, point out the groups that the ideology ignores or disregards. There will be one, you can find it. Claim that some other type of oppression is more important, say what that oppression is, why it's more important, say why the theory cannot adequately address this problem, and weigh. So if we're looking at single-sex spaces, right, if that's your motion, then if you are proposition, you are like, this is why single-sex spaces are important. And you give a bunch of stuff that is kind of similar to like a radical feminist perspective of like why it's important, for example, for women to have access to feel safe in a sporting context. Point out the fact that most young girls stop participating in sports around the time they hit puberty, and that's likely to do because of the fact that they are feeling uncomfortable because of the male gaze and feeling uncomfortable with the ickiness of menstruation. That's a bad thing because sport is very important to everyone to do for their overall well-being. 3 minutes? Holy fuck. Okay. If you're the opposition, be like, hey, what about trans people? And then make that your entire case and then weigh and then win. How to win movement debates. These are this house as the feminist movement would. The feminist movement wants gender equality. To achieve these aims, it needs to have membership, popular support, and resources. mostly funds. The feminist movement, therefore, must not alienate its core membership, because then it has nobody to campaign for it. It must not be seen as too extreme, because their MPs will not want to do its policy things in Parliament. And it must acknowledge the fact it has limited airtime, limited funds and time and space in people's brains, and must prioritize issues within the campaign to put money towards, to put airtime towards. So if you want to win a debate like this, you talk about how the motion does or does not do any or all of the above, and go, here is how campaigning about Greek life is less important objectively than campaigning about abortion in the United States, and then do your weighing, which is your most important thing. How to win when an actor is WGN. You have got to prove that your actor is a feminist for this to be successful. If you don't prove your actor is a feminist, people are going to be like, why do I care? Why does this actor care? Especially if you're arguing for them to do something that is going to hurt themselves, right? So the easiest way to do that is to point out some sort of culturally ubiquitous feminist principle that the actor is going to have, and or feminist role models, which could be a celebrity, or it could be their mother, or it could be their mentor, right? And then, and access the internet. Access the internet is very helpful as a mechanism for this as well, because you can just say they were on Tumblr in 2014 and therefore they're a feminist, with more analysis. And then say why these feminist tendencies will make the actor act in a feminist way, why these are more important than their other tendencies, why these are more important than their straight up utilitarianism, right? Why you would be more likely, why this actor would be more likely to be paid less in order to do feminism than to be paid more and not do feminism, as an example. Everything is feminism, a well-placed minority extension. Do not look at my record for extensions at Euros last year, as I'm good at them, I promise. Women are a marginalized group all over the world. So in most motions, you can make the debate about how they would be or have been fucked over. A motion about here's examples. Motion about any form of budget cuts. Well, now women are going to have to do more unpaid labor because they've cut social security. Motion about sports. Hey, women's sports are underfunded compared to men, and that sucks. And also the thing I said about puberty before. Motion about love. Marriage is a deadly gilded cage that traps women in servitude, forced by state-sanctioned benefits for women, and propagandized then to the narrative of love. And that's your extension. So that is some examples of ways that you can make everything feminism, which is also what I do in my day-to-day life. We're not going to do this because we don't have time. Sorry. Here is your further reading. And now it is time. Any last questions? Questions only and not comments because times. Great. So it's time for you all to do a debate about feminism that I have chosen. It's time for me to leave. I need to go to Aberdeen. Thank you.